No, this is perfect. Thank you so much, Don. What I will do now is, if you have a question, you are welcome to ask it in a public chat. I had a few questions already sent and forwarded to me, so I will ask that. My atheist friend did have time to pop in, and he couldn't stay for long, but he definitely sent me a question, and I think if he looks back at the recording, he will really would want an answer for his question. So let me start with his. I said two of the questions are basically the same. So the question is the following. Science shows conclusively that God is not necessary. Believing in God's existence does not in any way or form necessitate his existence. It is mere wish thinking. Do we need God for the universe to exist?
That's actually 4 or 5 different questions rolled into one. That's like asking, when did I stop beating my wife? It's a complex question.
Yeah,
okay, when he says it's wish fulfillment, does anybody wish for a God who will burn people in hell? I don't think so. So that idea is just pure nonsense. It's perhaps even more wish fulfillment for atheists that he not be there so that they don't have to stand in judgment for their behavior in their life. I'm sorry, could you read it one more time? Because there's some of those I kind of, it's such a complex question. If you could read it one more time, I'll address each of them individually.
Absolutely, Don. Yeah, I think he's first of all making a statement. He says science shows conclusively that God is not necessary. So that is an assumption. And then he goes on to say it's mere wish thinking. And then he asks the question, do we need God for the universe to exist? Do we need God for the universe to exist? And I think it boils down to the question of how did the universe start? How did something come from nothing? If God does not exist, well, then the atheist has a similar problem than what we biblical theists have. Isn't that true?
Yes. As far as wish thinking, that has nothing to do with whether God exists or not. Wishful thinking about God is he or she is discussing the psychology of believing, which is a different question entirely, and it applies just as well to the atheist as to the believer. They're wishful that there's no God. It says science has proved conclusively. I think we spent about 10 minutes discussing how science proves nothing conclusively, and we discussed how the methodological naturalism has nothing to say about God. So that's just pure nonsense and ignorance. And do we need God for the universe to exist? There's actually 2 different arguments for God's existence based on the universe. One's the vertical and horizontal arguments for God's existence. I think you're referring to the horizontal argument, which is like the Kalam cosmological argument, which is everything that begins to exist has the cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Since the Big Bang was the beginning of matter, energy, space, and time, therefore prior to the Big Bang there was no matter, energy, space, or time. Therefore, whatever the cause of that was is not made of matter, immaterial, or we would say perhaps spiritual, not made of physical energy, and matter and energy are interchangeable. We know that from Einstein's special theory of relativity, E=mc². So those are basically the same thing. So it's not made of matter or energy, spiritual. It's not within time, as a timeless being, and is not part of space. It's not 3-dimensional. Is a infinite being, not a finite being. So what we have is a creator who created a universe that is not physical, that is not temporal, and that is infinite. And I would argue that would be personal, because chose to create the universe and human. There's only 2 types of non-physical beings that we can conceive of. One is the personal God, and one is impersonal abstract objects like numbers and logic and such like that. Only one of those 2 would have the ability to create anything, and that would be God. So we're perfectly rational from a horizontal cosmological argument, the Kalam, to believe that God created the universe. And as far as his saying you don't need God, that's obviously that's pure nonsense. The vertical cosmological argument says that everything that's in existence now is being held in existence by something else. That is, if there was no oxygen, I wouldn't be here. Everything is existence is caused by something other than itself. And if every part of the universe's existence is caused by something other than itself, then the universe as a whole is caused by something other to exist by something other than itself. In this conception, the universe is more like a song than like a toy truck. A toy truck, if you find it, could have been there for any amount of time, but a song, you have to postulate who is singing when you hear it, that there must be a source that continues to keep this song in existence. So from two different directions, God is necessary for the universe to exist, because either everything in the universe causes itself to exist, or there's an end to that chain. It's kind of like you're looking at Christmas lights hanging, and you hang this light on the one above it, and you hang that light on the one above it. You can't hang lights above it infinitely. It has to be anchored somewhere, and the cause of existence, the causal chain of existence, terminates with God, that God causes all to continue in existence. So the person is misinformed and just plain wrong, making statements and throwing the word science out there doesn't make it a scientific statement.
Absolutely. No, well said. Well said. Well, here's another fun question. I think this looks at it from a very different perspective.
Okay.
So it says, I agree that science cannot explain the need for meaning, but it can surely help me to brew a beer to feel happy. Does it mean that science, does it mean therefore that science is therefore more useful than belief about a fairy tale God?
Oh, he's referring to a pragmatic explanation. If everything that makes his life worth living is based on a theistic universe, then, and I'm not referring to beer as being necessary from theistic. I'm talking about joy, the happiness he feels. From an evolutionary standpoint, beer does not contribute to the propagation of the species in a positive way. It's enjoyable, certainly, if it's good beer, and by that I mean not American beer. But does that make it so? From a pragmatic perspective, does I hope he's being funny, because if God's necessary for us to even exist, if God stopped willing our existence, then the universe would cease to exist. Then I think beer would be of secondary and science would be of secondary importance. And then, as you know, we discussed the limitations of science.
Absolutely. Well, Clayton Phillips in the chat said William Lane Craig versus Christopher Hitchens, the classic debate between them two about does God exist. Hitchens mentioned that the galaxy, the Andromeda, is on approach to collide with the Milky Way. That is in a few million years, I think, and it will cause a mass extinction. What are your general thoughts on the collision from a theistic Christian perspective?
Well, I think that proposed collision is in the hundreds of billions of years in the future. The sun is proposed to go nova in about 4.5 billion years. So if you follow a purely scientific line of reasoning, then humans would be extinct long before the Milky Way and the Andromeda galaxy ran into each other. From a Christian perspective, I don't see God waiting hundreds of billions of years before he decides he's seen enough.
Yeah, here's another question that might lean into that question, and it's also from a question on the existence of evil. It says, did God create evil? If so, why would he hold us morally accountable? Did he not set us up for failure?
Sorry, I write the questions down, type them down as you say them to make sure I don't lose track. Did God create evil? I actually discussed that. I realize I said a lot of things, But did God create evil? Evil's not a thing, so God did not create evil. When God created the universe, he said it was good. And by that, what is meant is not morally good. Stars moving has no moral aspect. It's more the traditional philosophical understanding of good as meaning God created the universe and it was what he intended it to be. A good cup is what holds liquids. A bad cup doesn't hold liquids. There's no moral judgment there. And in that sense, the universe was good because it was did exactly what God intended it to do. So evil, as I discussed, is a privation. It's a lack. It's parasitic on the good. So he did not create evil. So why can he hold us accountable? Because we choose to do evil. We choose to do less than what God says is the best. If God created everything, including humans, and he had a telos, an end, a purpose in mind, then there's a better and worse way to get to anything. There's many ways to mow your lawn. You could use a lawnmower, you could use scissors, you could use fingernail clippers. But there's better ways, and God's way is the best way. And any other way we do is either less good towards the same purpose or against his purpose. It is evil in the sense that you are now working against God's purpose. So can he hold us accountable for that? Of course. That's why he can hold us accountable for that, because we're in the act of rebellion. We're sinning against God. He has created us to be a certain way. We know it. Every time a child goes to a shop and steals something, they know they're doing wrong. You feel it inside you. Everyone knows they're doing wrong. Some of them can numb their feelings by alcohol, drugs, or enough repetition of the wrong, or hanging out with enough people to convince them they're right. But deep down inside, there's a conscience that's telling us we're wrong, and we know it. And when you stand before God, you're not going to sit there and say, oh, you judged me unfairly, because you're going to know that you've been in front of a perfect God that knows every thought and every action of your life and knows why you did everything. God is a perfect judge, and in the end, when you're being judged, no one's going to have an excuse. God gives all of us a certain amount of light, and no matter whether we've heard the gospel or not, and how we respond to that light is how he will judge us, not based on whether we followed a certain law we never heard of or thought about.
Excellent. Well, let's quickly get to Tawanda's question. I think it's a good question as well to answer. He starts off and he says, so essentially science can explain naturalistic world, but fails at explaining the non-naturalistic world. An example is science can explain the sunset, but not why we find the sunset beautiful. Or am I missing the argument? If I'm correct, it would also mean science cannot account for evil, nor can it account for selfless good. What would you say about that?
Let's see. Can science? Yeah, exactly. Science can't explain what's going on inside your head when you're finding the sunset beautiful, because science doesn't have a definition of beautiful. But it's interesting. As scientists recognize beauty, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that as a scientific explanation, there is none. You'll find physicists repeatedly say that certain theories they knew was right because the mathematics were so beautiful. Now, I've never reached the stage of mathematical knowledge where I found a formula beautiful, but those that have tell me it is beautiful, and it's the beauty that leads them to believe they're going the right direction. So scientists believe in beauty, but there's no scientific explanation of what it is other than a psychological reaction. So Tawanda's correct. They cannot understand our internal reaction to beauty. And it's, if I'm correct, it would also mean science cannot account for evil. Science, good and evil is based on a moral universe. Science can give you definitions of what different societies hold to be good and evil, but it cannot adjudicate between them. It can't decide who's really right and what's really evil. Scientists can tell you that most of the world thought Nazi Germany in World War II was evil, but it cannot make that pronouncement itself because there's no mechanism within science to make those sort of judgments. So it cannot account for selfless good, and that's correct, because the theory of evolution says I should try to protect myself. That's built into me, and yet there's some people who sacrifice themselves for others. Then those are not really understandable under a pure theory of evolution.
Well, here's a question that can, in actual fact, also just deal with that question. It's a short question, and it says, survival of the fittest is the way people live. Is Darwinian evolution the only game in town?
I'm not quite sure the context of the question, so I'm not sure if they're asking from a Christian perspective or for a scientific perspective. There are theories other than Darwinian evolution. Of course, there's intelligent design, there's theistic evolution, there's progressive creationism, there's young and old earth creationism. There's various theories. Survival of the fittest, that's just a truism. It's a tautology. It's like saying he's a unmarried bachelor when you say survival of the fittest. Of course the fittest survive. Well, that's actually, there's no content to that statement. And I'm not making fun of the person asking the question. I'm saying in science in general, they throw that term out there without actually thinking about what they're saying. Survival of the fittest. Well, of course the fittest survive. It's like saying the winner of the race was the fastest. Well, yeah, that's the definition. But to say survival of the fittest is the way people live, I think most people are not motivated by survival of the fittest type mentality. I think most people are motivated by love for their family and desire to have better things for their family.
I agree. Last question, and this is actually a very interesting way of asking it. Science can prove that Jesus was probably not dead in the grave, but Christian sentiment proves it as a fact. How scientific is that? Christians are anti-science.
I'm not sure if that person's being serious or not, but there was a study done by the Journal of the American Medical Association in which they examined the accounts of the crucifixion, the flogging, etc. And they said from a medical perspective, there's zero doubt that Jesus was dead prior to being put in the grave. So when they say from a scientific perspective, there's 0.0 evidence that Jesus was alive when he was in the grave. And number two, a man who had had spikes driven through his hands and his wrist and his ankle bones and then survived to be declared to be God, rose him with power, is nonsense. It simply wouldn't happen. He would have been an emaciated cripple for the rest of his life. So there is zero evidence to support the atheistic understanding, and there's massive evidence to support the Christian side. And I'll give you just a few things. Number one, the empty tomb. What happened to the body? There's no evidence that a physically damaged Jesus survived the crucifixion, as if the Roman guards who were under punishment of death if they didn't kill people on the death penalty. Number two, when the spear went into Jesus' chest, it released blood and water, which indicated that the serum had already separated. He was dead. Number three, if the Jewish authorities wanted to end the new religion, all they had to do was show people the tomb with the body in it, but they didn't. Number four, they changed lives of the apostles. When Jesus was being arrested, they ran and hid. After the resurrection, they died rather than change their testimony. People will die for what they believe is true, but they will not die for what they know is false. So all the evidence is on the side of Christianity. None of the evidence is on the side of the atheist viewpoint.
Excellent. Well, Don, thank you.
And once again, appending the word science to a statement doesn't make it scientific.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for this discussion. Thank you so much for everybody that stayed and listened through it.